Hello and welcome to another episode of Pause It Podcast. I'm Dr. Sam, and with me, as always, is Dr. Robert. Welcome.
Hey guys, how's everybody doing?
So, today we are going to talk about chocolate toxicity, which is a really important one because the holidays are here.
Yes, they
And
are.
I don't know, your holidays are as chocolatey as mine, but I'll tell you what, we love chocolate around this house.
Actually, I don't use much chocolate myself, but I see enough of it on ER that I think it probably burns it out for me. I'll be completely honest with you.
Yeah, I know. Nothing turns you off to chocolate as much as like chocolate and vomit, the smell together.
Oh,
Really kind of
it's honestly, I'll be completely honest with people. Like, if it's just ingested, it's really not bad. Like, actually, the room smells kind of nice afterwards. Like, smells like chocolate. You're like, oh, this isn't bad.
Okay,
But the
yeah.
dog is like done it for like 2 or 3 hours, and then you make them vomit. Then it's not so nice anymore. It's not
Yeah.
the pleasant smell that you have. So there's definitely like there's a line, and you cross it very
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I guess that correlates to where you want them to be vomiting is right when it happens. So when it still smells good,
Exactly.
then you
Actually, that's
know.
the new measure of like when chocolate smells good.
Right.
So
So I guess let's get down to it then. So I think that most people, it's probably one of the most common toxicities that we see.
oh yeah.
It's also probably one of the most known, like everyone knows, chocolate's toxic to dogs.
Yes, I would agree. I
Um,
think everybody knows about it pretty well at this point.
yeah. And I think most people don't realize, or maybe they do, but it's also toxic to cats. It's just cats are generally smarter. I've never seen a cat toxicity with
I had
chocolate. Have
one
you?
cat that ingested in there. It was unfortunate, but it was a kitten. It was like it was like 6 months old
Oh
when it did
yeah.
it. So I was like still in that
Oh.
like inquisitive phase.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, they're usually smart enough not to eat too much, at
Yeah.
least in that regard. I think it had some mild like increase in its heart rate, but
Gotcha.
outside of
Even
that, it
that I
wasn't too
think
bad.
is more so. Usually with cats, it's like no more than what would upset their stomach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, cats are way smart, thank God.
Yeah. Yeah. But I would say this is probably the great equalizer, right? I'd say it's probably the most common toxicity I see.
Mhm.
And it's like you see so many more emergencies than I do, obviously, hence your job as an emergency vet versus
Sure.
me at a somehow this is the emergency that does happen when I'm open.
And I'd be curious just because I actually don't know because I've never worked general practice.
Mhm.
Like how does your clinic work out? Just even for the viewers too. Like, how does your clinic work out when emergencies come in? Because like something like that, like emergency, it's like, hey, we take priority of what cases come in. Do you guys like just say, hey, we gotta push back some of our appointments and slide this one in, or how does it work with you guys?
Well, that is the hard part about working in like more of a primary care setting because we
Mhm.
really aren't set up the way that you guys are where you can just say, hey, this is life threatening, this is just going to take precedence, and we're
Mhm.
just going to move it along as things are. So I'm sure that sometimes that's really a blessing to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Our days continue, so we have a full day as if
Mhm.
nothing was happening, and then when those things happen we shuffle. So it just really
Okay.
depends. So sometimes it's based on what doctor's available, who happened to
Okay.
be there at the moment when somebody called and said, "Hey, my dog ate X, Y, or Z." That's not most of the things that come in are like, "Oh, this is your patient.
Mhm.
You're the one that sees them the most, or you're the one that saw them
I guess that
last,
makes
and so
sense.
they're going to ask this question." But when it comes to my dog ate this or my dog ate that, it's not who they saw last, but who is the fastest person that they can talk to about it.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay.
and then so then generally too, that'll still be the same kind of thing. So we'll say, usually somebody will call and they'll say, "Hey, my dog ate, a bag of Halloween candy," or,
Mhm.
they ate a chocolate cake that we made for whatever. And then we'll say, "Okay, well, bring them right over
Sure.
now, come
Yeah.
now.
Please.
And the sooner you get here, the better." And where I am, I mean, for the most part, most of our patients also live pretty close. So we're usually get
Mhm.
people in within like 10 to 15 minutes of when they've called us. We'll say,
Yeah.
"Hey, get them here now." So that's step one. And then we'll usually have a quick look at like the
The schedule.
schedule.
Okay.
And it's hard. I think where it's the hardest is if, let's say, we like all the doctors are in a procedure or something like that. Well, then we can't leave a procedure that,
Yeah, that'd be
that would be the
tough.
one time. But that rarely, I would say that rarely if ever happens. There's usually at least one
Okay.
doctor that can deal with it. And then that's what we do. And people are pretty understanding. I mean, sometimes they'll be like, "Hey, an emergency just came in. If it's a
That's nice at
vaccine
least.
appointment, can you drop off your pet?" And they'll get to them once they're done with this.
Mhm.
Or, when we've had those occasions where it's like, "Oh no, I mean, it's a surgery and we're going." then yeah, we'll call, or like if it's the other doctor that took that emergency, then I will try to see if I can see his
Okay, so try and balance it out a
vaccines
little
or
bit.
whatever. It gets a little trickier when it's like, okay, well, I have this dog that we just found out has diabetes, and now I have to deal with this, but then you have this
Right.
emergency, and so now I have a vaccine appointment. And then we're shuffling a little bit. Things get a little harder.
Okay.
I will say it doesn't happen that much because we're not an emergency clinic, you know.
Yeah,
So
I guess
it's
that's
not
fair.
the same frequency with which your whole day gets blown up. It's not quite the
Yeah.
same. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I feel like people definitely come in like to you guys for dog teeth and stuff like that. And I feel like they'll like a lot of times they'll go to their primary vet first because they
Oh yeah.
will just do that.
Mhm.
And as they
Well,
should, it's not a bad
Well,
thing.
people do tend to, from what I find, even sometimes put off dealing with certain types of emergencies because of the trust and the rapport that we have. So there are even times where I'm like, you probably should have gone
A
like
little sooner.
2 days ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not for lack of caring. These are people who
Mhm.
really, really care and love their pets, but think like, well, you know them. So I want you to I want to know what you think.
Yeah.
And I totally understand that. And I think in some cases that's appropriate and some it's not. And so I think part of what we're doing here is trying to teach people like when that's appropriate and when that's not.
Yes.
Type thing, right?
And I guess probably open this conversation. I think it's always good to call your primary vet first, see if they can slide you in first, because always you'll get seen sooner.
Hmm.
And most time, just from an ER perspective, if it is something that is a toxin that your pet ate or a foreign object that they met, we bring them back pretty quickly. It's like you get there, we bring you back. You may not talk to a doctor for a while, but
Hmm.
we'll bring them back. We'll get permission to vomit them, and then we'll get up whatever's in there, and then we'll talk to you like within an hour or two usually. But it just depends on how busy we are that day.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's not that much different for us in the fact of like our techs all know what to do and
Yeah.
we
Right.
have like a previous wait. So we'll have an idea of like how much medication we need to get them to throw up and you know what I mean
Mhm.
and stuff like that. And obviously weigh them when they get there. Triage them real quick and then get it up, get the toxin
Okay.
up as long as it's an appropriate thing to vomit them for.
Yeah. No, that's
Which
fair.
which PSA isn't every single toxin.
Yes,
We'll get
that's
to
a
that later.
yes, that's a good thing to bring up actually for later.
Yeah.
Um,
But it is true,
but
it's also something that you should ask your vet because people automatically like, shouldn't just automatically be like, "Well, I'm gonna make them throw up."
mhm.
There's a lot of reasons that we shouldn't do that, but you should check because, you know, it's important.
Yeah, and I can't stress that enough. Like, just call. Like, whether it's a ASPCA, whether or like poison control, whether it's your veterinarian, whether it's an emergency clinic, call someone before you do something. The amount of harm I've seen by just people like being like, "I read this on Google." So much more problems happen because
Yeah,
of that than anything else. So just call.
yeah,
It's most time it's
there
free
is
to
a
call
lot of
some
bad
places.
information out there, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So
What is your do you guys call poison control every time you have someone come in or no?
So, not for chocolate, and honestly, most things I've seen now to a decent enough extent were, and that's just because I'm pricing longer than some of like other ER doctors, whether we see, whether it's Advil or Tylenol or whatever, we've seen those enough times. Every once in a while, you get something weird that pops up. I'll say the biggest thing is plants, um, and owners all the time. I think they think we're botanists as well.
Yeah,
They're like,
I know.
it's so
True.
funny. They're like, "My dog ate this." I'm like, "It's toxic." I'm like, "Well, every plant's gonna make your dog have a little bit of an upset stomach
Right.
regardless. Is it truly toxic?" And they're like, "Well, why don't you know?" Like, do you know how many things dogs eat that I don't know? Like,
Oh,
I've
yeah.
seen little dinosaur toys in dog stomachs. I've seen just everything at this point.
Oh,
So
I know,
they
I
keep
know.
changing it up, and honestly, there's so many things I don't know. Like, it's just hard to know everything.
Yeah, it's funny because that's definitely a weak point for me. I mean, and
Mm.
while we were in class together, we took the poisonous plants tests
Oh
together.
God, I don't miss
And
that
I
at
think I
all.
learned that and promptly forgot all of it because I can look
Uh,
it up. So
Exactly. Most of those things you just look up most of the time. You know
yeah,
where to look, and that's the most important part of veterinary
yeah.
medicine, knowing where to look and how accurate the information is. That's kind of what makes
And
the
to
big
remember
difference.
that just because you looked it up last time doesn't mean that it hasn't changed, because there
Mhm.
is a lot of stuff that changes. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
do tend to check myself, especially for the things that I don't see all the time. I'm like, "You know what?
Mhm.
I remember it's this way, but let me just check and make sure that hasn't changed."
Oh,
And,
100%.
the other doctors I work with actually love plants, and they know a lot of
Really?
toxic plants, so I'm usually like, "Hey, guys, what do you think?" You know? Well, we
I'm gonna
still
put
have
you
to
on
look some
speed
stuff up.
dial.
Yeah.
I'm like, "I
Yeah.
need to talk to one of your
Bring it.
colleagues real quick."
"Hey, is this a toxic plant?" Yeah. But no, we are lucky because we can look a lot of things up. And, I think with chocolate toxicity in, specifically, that
Mm.
is definitely one of those ones that if you know that you've come home and your dog just went crazy on a bag of chocolate, get to the vet right away
Yeah.
for so many reasons.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's not something to wait for, especially, there's different types of chocolate. I think we'll talk about that at some point or even right now. But
Yeah, why not right now? Why don't you
yeah.
get into it?
Oh, love chocolate. So yeah, definitely different types of chocolate are a bigger problem. And the size of your dog means a lot in all of
Mhm.
that. Honestly, I've had some dogs come in, I'm like, hey, I'm not really that worried. You can go home. Or hey, we're just gonna make them vomit because it's just to get out of their system, then you can go home. It's not a big deal. A lot of it's like milk chocolate stuff. Not
Right.
usually a huge concern in small enough quantities.
Mhm.
But where you start getting concerns is like dark chocolate and baker's chocolate. That stuff is nasty. That stuff
Mhm.
I've seen even small amounts put some dogs in the hospital for
4
24
days?
hours plus.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
can be really bad for a lot
Mhm.
of patients. So
Yeah.
like symptoms wise, the biggest things to watch, even if you don't think your pet's symptomatic for it yet, a lot of times it'll start off by having GI signs like vomiting or diarrhea. Then they start having high heart rates, which is hard to tell at home. So that's why I really encourage owners to bring their pets in because
Yep.
they might act a little bit restless or something like that, but their blood pressure might be high. They might be having very abnormal heart rates and rhythms. And then really bad cases, they can have seizures, and one I've seen die from not being treated on time.
Yep.
So it definitely happens. It's not something to brush away by any
Yeah,
means.
I had a similar experience actually. I had
Mm.
an owner, their dog ate a bunch of chocolate and I had
Okay.
them come in, we vomited them and I said, "Okay, we need to hospitalize and we need to watch them, we need to have them on fluids." And I went into the whole thing and she said, "No, taking him
Really?
home." And and then they took him home and then he started having seizures. By the time we got him back,
Uh,
he had died in our parking lot. It was awful.
I'm sorry. That's
Yeah.
still listen to your vet at the end of the day. Like a lot
Yeah.
of times they know what they're talking about. And that's tough because you hate seeing that.
Yeah, no, it
And
was heartbreaking, actually, it was
yeah,
awful, you know? And I think it's because there's always a story about how somebody's dog ate chocolate and they didn't do anything and they were fine. And that's
yeah,
great. I mean, that's great when that happens, but I guess the thing is that you don't always know how much they ate, and
yeah,
not everybody, is gonna have the same reaction, and we know the potential reaction. So, I guess with toxicities, the way that I look at it is I'll treat for the worst case scenario and then be
oh
happy when
yeah.
it doesn't happen.
Every time, I think that's the best. I think hopefully that's most of our colleagues practice too. Like
Yeah.
you kind of have to because it sounds terrible. One, you see like you have to see why cover your ass
Mhm.
because you don't want to send a dog home that you think is going to be fine and then have it come back later on when you didn't treat them appropriately.
Right?
So it's better to treat more aggressive and then say afterwards, all right, then go home sooner because things are fine. And one thing to help your vet out is when you do know that your pet has some food or chocolate in that particular case, bring in the package. The package is super helpful
Yes.
because otherwise I spend way too much time looking up what type of Dove chocolates and what
And you
concentration they
can be
are.
wrong too.
Mhm.
That's the thing. I mean, I love when people, no matter what the toxicity is, if you can bring
Mm.
me what you think they ate, um,
Yeah,
then I'm going to be really thankful for that. I think that sometimes we're sitting here and we're just going to assume that it was dark
yeah,
chocolate because if I don't have the information, I'm assuming the worst case scenario so that I can
exactly.
let you know where we are.
Mhm.
And so that's usually how I'll treat it. Um, and I think with chocolate toxicity too, there's a little bit of a controversy. So I'm curious, do you do charcoal or no?
See, we do charcoal, yeah.
Yeah.
But actually, I just heard. Actually, that's funny you mentioned that because literally the last time, did you hear something differently? Because ASPCA just started telling people not to do
Oh, it's
charcoal.
on. I mean, if you look up like the VIN things, it seems to be. Oh, for people who are listening, VIN
Yeah,
is a
sorry.
just explain what it is as we're talking
Yeah.
about it. But it's an information network where veterinarians can like share information and post cases or ask
Mhm.
questions. And so sometimes we'll get really good information and there's some good information that's on there. It's for veterinarians only. It's not open to the public.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's a great resource, especially if you find yourself in those situations where maybe you don't have another resource, you can't find exactly what you're looking for. I'm
Mhm.
pretty lucky. I always have really smart people like Robert around that I can call and be like, "Hey, what
The
do I
door goes both
do?"
ways, trust me.
um, but either way, you don't always have that situation. So it's nice to have a database. And so speaking of this specifically, in some cases we will give activated charcoal
Mhm.
after we've had your pet vomit and then we've stopped the vomiting, and that's to kind of absorb what's left in the stomach,
Yep.
and then help reabsorption as the body processes it.
Yep.
Easy kind of user-friendly way to
That's a is user
explain
that's the
second.
best user way
So
user-friendly way to
yeah,
say it. So,
um,
yes.
and so, but there is a bit of controversy about whether or not to do that with chocolate. I guess I always thought since
Mm.
about 60% can stay in the gut, you should always do it. Am I off
Yeah, no, so
there? Or
that's what I tell owners all the time is that
yeah,
even if your pet's vomiting before they come in, I will still make them vomit again,
yeah,
just because they can retain up to 60% of content in their stomach alone.
right.
So it's worth making them vomit, not over and over again, but get one good vomit up, because a lot of times they'll have a ton of fluid come up and it'll all be chocolatey brown fluid. And
Mhm.
even time wise, even if you think it's like too late, I've gotten chocolate out of dogs like 6 to 7 hours afterwards they've ingested. So
Really? Wow.
yeah, so I will make them vomit almost every time, unless it's been like a good 8 to 12 hours plus. It's been anything close to 6 hours, I'll make them do it, because honestly, I've been successful more times than I can count. So it's
Mhm.
so if your dog ate, or well, yeah, just dog in this case, your dog ate chocolate, bring them in, even if you're kind of close to that timeline, it's worth doing.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I totally agree. I'm still on the charcoal train personally. It makes sense to me
Yeah.
physiologically, so I'm always like, I don't really see a reason not to do it.
Did they say why not? Do they say why it's
I
the next step?
wanna
Or
say that it has to do with, like, maybe dehydration, or I don't know. I'm not sure.
because I know
I
like
forget
our
exactly
biggest
what it is.
concern is the high sodium. So when you give a dog charcoal, it causes their sodium to go up.
Yeah, sure.
And if you're not monitoring that carefully, we've had dogs come back in for problems with that, especially if they've
Right.
gotten more than one dose. And I'm actually I'm a baby with my dose now. Like I don't do as much as they tell you to do because of that very reason. Because a lot of times we don't have the opportunity to check blood work afterwards. So I'll give them a smaller dose of charcoal just to get something. But
Mhm.
I'm curious. I'll have to look into that. I'll next podcast and come back with
I
that.
think the other thing too is also like, what else are you doing for management? Do you know what I mean? Like, what's there? Like,
Yeah.
are you going to have them on fluids? Are you know what I mean? To me,
Mm.
I'm thinking of the scenario where I'm going to be watching them the entire day. I'm going to have them on fluids. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I feel like you are, and I'm not one that's going to keep giving them charcoal. I'll do it one time. And
Yeah.
that's
I'm
it.
a one timer. That's
Yeah.
it. For
Yeah.
most things, yeah, there's very few things I'll give twice for. So
Yeah,
one's
no,
always for chocolate.
I'm totally with you on that. So I guess for me, that's why I'm always like, well, one time I don't think, and I don't give a whopping
Mhm.
dose either. So there you go. I'm
Yeah.
a pretty like low end of the range, mostly because you also have to get them to take it after you've
Yeah.
just
And
made
it's
them vomit,
so
gave them Cernia, and
And it's always little white dogs, man. I tell you, trying to give them charcoal, they turn like sheet black as soon as you try,
yeah,
because they hate it and it's all over their face. And
yeah.
the owner thinks we torture them in the back. And like, I promise we didn't.
You're like, no, no,
It just, they
no.
actually liked it, but they just have it everywhere now. So
Yeah.
it
Oh
just,
yeah.
it's always
Yeah.
little white dogs.
Yeah,
Um,
and the charcoal, just for those of you who don't know, is usually this very, like, thick, dark
yes,
liquid.
it's
So,
gross. I would not eat
yeah.
it. And then
No.
yet there's some dogs you just put it in a
Yeah.
bowl and they're like, this is the best thing ever. And they go right for it.
Yeah.
It's a lab
It's true.
usually. So
Labs,
labs.
Yeah.
So thank God for
Yeah.
labs.
Yeah. But they're also usually the ones that eat all the things that they're not supposed to, so,
Yeah, it
there
goes
you
both
go.
ways.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. But that, yeah, was kind of what was my thought was too. That's interesting to know that you still do it, because I saw there
mhm.
was some controversy, and I was like, "Oh,
Yeah, I just heard about
curious."
it like I think within the last month. I was like, oh, interesting. So I meant to look into that. So I'll look into the next podcast, see if there's any information I can find for the audience that why or why not. Because I'm very
Yeah.
curious now.
I always find it interesting that it's so hard to get cats to vomit.
Oh, it's such pain.
Yeah.
So awful. Do you use hydromorphone now or do you use dextromethorphan still?
I only ever use Dextomator.
Yeah, they say you give hydromorphone sub Q, and I've seen pretty good success with that too.
Mhm.
It doesn't make them a sedate, so
Yeah. No,
you
I
try
mean,
it
it
out. But
totally makes sense, but we don't have it, so.
yeah, well, that's and there's that too.
So,
Um, yep.
yeah.
But yeah, cats are the
I wish we
worst.
did, but we don't.
I know, right?
So,
It's Dextermodor works just fine, but
yeah. But
it's just funny.
do you have to spin them? That's the other thing too.
A few of my texts will be like, "We're gonna go in a circle for a little bit," and they'll like try and get them,
Yeah,
and they just never do. It's such a pain. It's like less
it
than
is.
50%.
It is. It's
Um,
really, really hard for those of you who
yeah.
have never tried to get your cat to vomit up whatever toxicity they hate.
Maybe we
It's
just gotta put them like on some carpet because they always find my cats always use to puke on the carpet. There'd be hardwood floor everywhere, but
oh
they'd
yeah.
find the carpet to puke on. Somebody else get some carpet underneath them. They're like, "Oh, I can puke here now."
That's true. Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. Anyway,
But
um,
yeah. And then so just as far as your success rate with toxicities and things like that with chocolate, do you usually see it going pretty well, and how long do you find them to have to be in the clinic for after?
I'll say it's rare they're in there post 24 hours. Usually they have a really
Okay.
good success rate. It's 12 hours actually. In most cases, I'll have most of them on at least be on the phone with the owners within 12 hours. And like, hey, they're barking up a storm. They're ready to go home.
Mhm.
Everything looks good. It's usually not more than 12 hours. It depends on how much they got into sometimes. And even I tell them that usually if they're not, again, if they had an extreme dose and they haven't shown clinically yet, I'll still keep them for maybe 12 hours.
Yeah.
Or if they had a high dose and they are clinical for it, then I'm like, yeah, we're keeping you for 24 hours. And we'll send you home earlier if they're doing better. But
Mhm.
yeah, not every patient I keep either. It just depends on, that's why you just got to talk to your vet and kind of be accurate with as much information as you can, because they'll change how long they stay for.
Mhm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the other thing too is that really, trying to figure out, even though I know it's expensive to, sometimes come in and have those
Mhm.
treatments done, it is really important because, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you don't, I know it's like everything's a bit of a, okay, there's expense to veterinary medicine, and I think it's getting more expensive. And
Yeah.
obviously we're trying every day to make that a little easier.
Yep. That's why you
With
should
my
join my
Balto.
Balto.
Exactly. But at the same time, it really does pay dividends to have
Yeah.
the right people take a look at him and make sure everything's okay.
Yeah. You can always at least have a conversation. The conversation is worth it, I promise. So
Mhm.
makes things a lot easier.
Oh yeah,
But
no, there's no question. And so actually, if there are more questions or more toxicities or other things that you'd like us to talk about too, not just chocolate, why don't you hit them with the email, Robert?
you can all send it to podcast@mybalto.com, and we'll make sure we get all your questions and address them usually in subsequent podcasts, because we want to make sure we take some time to answer some of those for you guys.
Right.
Um, because we like to hear your questions. It's honestly, sometimes we don't think of everything while we're
Yeah,
on
yeah,
here.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think sometimes there's things like we take for granted that just like our second nature.
Oh,
So we
yeah,
start talking about it and it's like, oh yeah, chocolate toxicity and so
exactly.
but I think the take home really is just like know what if you can give us the information of what they got into, and also just have a sense of like what the most dangerous things are. The darker the
Exactly.
chocolate, the more dangerous it is. And if you know you have that stuff in your house, try to put it away. Close
Yes.
cabinets, especially during like the holidays like it is now. Like,
Yeah.
you were saying like baking chocolate is definitely the worst.
Yes, by
So
far.
if you can, if you know like you're going to be baking a whole bunch, maybe go ahead and just really close that away, put it in Tupperwares, just keep it away from your dogs. Because you certainly don't want that to be part of your holiday.
Yeah, and dogs have a great sense of smell. I think we all know this.
Mhm.
Hiding it from your kids is not as good as hiding it from your dog. I
Yeah.
see so many parents are like, "Oh yeah, we're hiding our Halloween candy or hiding, the Easter egg baskets from our, kids," and a dog got them to them the next morning. Like that happens all the time because dogs are
Yeah.
just so much better at sniffing that stuff out, and it's always labs too.
Yeah.
It's always
Yeah,
labs.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, and I think people think like, "Oh, I'm gonna put it in, like, in the back of my closet, like,
Mhm.
down, or somewhere like that," and it's like, "Oh, no, no, up where they can't
Yes,
where they can't get to it."
up is
Um,
important.
yeah, yeah. And, yeah, just do your best to keep them away from it because it is a tragedy when they get into things that they shouldn't.
Yeah, they look miserable when you make them vomit. They're not thrilled.
It is, it's so sad.
So they're usually wagging their tails afterwards, but there's that they're like, I regret this a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and two other, I guess, important things to make sure people know about when you eat chocolate. Um, oh, and I totally forgot. One's pancreatitis.
Oh, yeah.
Something to think about.
Yeah.
So even though your dog eats a lot of it, I think probably fair to say we see it mostly in our middle-aged, older populations if it does affect them.
Mhm.
I don't see a lot of young dogs, honestly, but yeah, when they eat chocolate of high load, it's got high fat content, and their pancreas goes nuts. Not a big
Mhm.
fan, and unfortunately, they get pancreatitis afterwards, and that can almost be worse than the chocolate itself, to be honest with you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because I feel like too that just kinda sets them up for needing more of a long-term
Oh yeah.
solution to things as opposed to it just being this, like, one-off, like, we get them through this little tiny thing and then we move on. It's like, once you've angered the pancreas.
Ah, it's the worst. I hate that organ so much. The amount of
Yeah,
problems that thing causes,
yeah.
it's
Don't mess
awful.
with the pancreas
Yeah,
ever.
don't touch it surgically. Don't touch it. Just leave it alone.
Just leave it
Uh,
alone.
just leave it
Don't look
alone.
at it.
Um, yeah, and then foreign bodies. We've had some
Oh, yeah.
wrappers if they eat them in a significant enough quantity, they can cause a foreign body and need surgery. That's rare, but it does happen occasionally. So just if your candies had wrappers on them, just make sure you know you're like
That you
keep
got
an
them
eye on
all
how
over.
much stuff
Yeah,
comes
we
out.
do see quite a bit of the wrappers come up too. I agree with
Yeah,
that. I've never actually had one cause a blockage. I knock on wood because I don't ever want to see that because yeah, I mean they're
Oh,
already sick then from the toxicity, and then now you
yeah.
have this extra piece of the pie that's gonna definitely make
And it
things
gets
worse.
delayed a little because they're like, oh, maybe it's just pancreatitis. That's why they're still vomiting.
Yeah.
They don't think about the wrappers being the problem. And I've seen that a couple times, and it throws you off because you don't. It's not the first thing you think about when it
Oh
happens.
yeah, no, no, especially if you've made them vomit and a significant amount of them came up,
Mhm.
and part of it too is if your primary vet did the initial, you know, getting them to vomit up and then they
Yeah,
end up in the emergency clinic.
or vice
Uh,
versa. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so like we're only as good as what we know happened, and we can only, make the best decisions based on what we saw. Or even in the records. I mean, they can be great records, but if you don't know how many they got into and you have 10 wrappers and we're thinking, oh, that's probably everything. We have no idea to know that there's still another 10 in there.
Yep. Exactly. So,
So
so it's important to have access to your pet's records too.
absolutely. Yeah, another thing. I know it's like all these PSAs today, but it's true. This is definitely one of those times where if you really can like have constant access to records where you're not redoing things and everybody knows what's going on, we can all be on the same page, then we really
Mhm.
are a team. I mean, it's the team of the owner, the emergency vet, and then the primary care doctor, which
Yeah.
is like that's the dream, right? When you can get everybody together on the same page and to say, hey,
Mhm.
we're all here to help each other. We all have the same goal. That's to get your pet as healthy as possible back home and feeling great without like spending needless amounts of money. I mean, the goal
Yeah.
is to just do what we can and do the best we can.
Mhm. No, I 100% agree. So,
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're going to keep talking about toxicity, but the next time we're going to get into some other fun holiday toxicities. Maybe we will get into a couple of plants next time. What do you think?
lovely.
Yeah.
I can't wait. I hate plants.
Well, they'll be common ones. So we'll get
Yes,
it. We'll
these
get
are
into the
yes.
common ones first before we start getting into the crazy
I think I just
stuff.
had a bad experience. I had, like, an owner berate me one time. She was like, "How do you not know what plant is toxic?" I'm like, "I don't know plants. I'm
You're
a
like, I know
dog."
lilies are toxic, but
Exactly.
beyond
She was like,
that.
I know animals."
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
fun stuff. We can't wait to
Yeah.
talk to you guys about it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us again. This has been the Pause It podcast, and we're looking forward to talking more toxicities with you next time. As always, I'm Dr. Sam, and this is Dr. Robert. Thanks for stopping by.
Bye, guys.